The desert wind carries secrets across Utah's Highway 276, where sagebrush and silence have kept their vigil for decades. In April 1998, a bundle wrapped in plastic and rope appeared beside this lonely stretch of road, a discovery that would haunt investigators and shatter a family's world. Inside lay the remains of a woman, carefully concealed, her identity stolen along with her life. For 20 years, she was known only as the Maidenwater victim. Her family searched endlessly, clinging to hope that grew thinner with each passing season. They never stopped believing she would come home. Meanwhile, the man who reported her missing lived with his secret until guilt and fear consumed him completely. When modern science finally whispered her name, Lena Reyes Geddes, the truth emerged, like bones from shifting sand. The husband, who had grieved publicly, had orchestrated her death with chilling precision. His suicide years earlier had seemed like another tragedy. Now it revealed itself as the final act of a calculated killer. But how does a community reconcile 20 years of believing a lie? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. A couple driving along Utah Highway 276 notices something unusual on the roadside. The morning air is crisp, carrying the scent of desert sage across the isolated landscape. They slow their vehicle, curiosity overcoming caution. The bundle lies partially hidden behind a cluster of weathered rocks. Wrapped tightly in plastic and secured with rope, it appears deliberately placed rather than discarded. The woman in the passenger seat feels an immediate sense of unease. "We should call someone," she whispers to her husband. He parks the car and approaches the bundle carefully. The plastic is weathered by months of exposure to Utah's harsh elements. Through a tear in the material, he glimpses something that makes his stomach turn. The call to emergency services comes at exactly 10:47 a.m. The dispatcher's voice remains calm and professional, but the caller's words send a chill through the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. "There's a body out here on 276, wrapped up like someone tried to hide it." Within minutes, the first patrol car is racing through the desert, kicking up clouds of red dust that hang in the still air. The isolation of the location becomes immediately apparent to responding officers. This stretch of highway sees little traffic, making it an ideal place to dispose of evidence. The couple who made the discovery stands beside their car, shaken by what they've found. They answer questions with trembling voices, explaining how they noticed the bundle from the road. Neither can explain what compelled them to investigate further. The deputy arrives first on scene, his radio crackling with updates as more units respond. He approaches the bundle with practiced caution, noting the methodical way it has been wrapped and secured. This is not a hasty disposal. Someone took time to ensure the contents would remain hidden. The desert stretches endlessly in all directions, broken only by the thin ribbon of asphalt and scattered Joshua trees. In this vast emptiness, the carefully wrapped bundle seems almost insignificant, yet it represents someone's final resting place, far from family and home. As the deputy waits for the coroner and detective to arrive, he establishes a perimeter around the scene. The wind continues to blow, carrying away any trace evidence that might have remained after months of exposure. Time has already begun erasing the story this place might tell. Detective receives the call while reviewing case files at the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. The description of the scene immediately captures attention. Bodies don't wrap themselves in plastic and rope. This discovery represents either a carefully planned disposal or an attempt to preserve evidence. The drive to the scene takes 45 minutes through increasingly desolate terrain. Detective has worked dozens of cases in Garfield County, but the isolation of this location strikes as particularly ominous. Someone chose this spot specifically, banking on the assumption that the desert would keep their secret. Upon arrival, Detective surveys the scene with experienced eyes. The bundle measures approximately 5 feet in length, consistent with human remains. The rope binding shows careful attention to detail, multiple layers securing the plastic wrapping. This level of organization suggests premeditation rather than panic. The coroner's van arrives as detective begins documenting the scene. Coroner emerges with equipment, ready to begin the delicate process of examination. Both understand that this discovery likely represents just the beginning of a long investigation. "Any idea how long it's been here?" detective asks. Coroner examines the weathering patterns on the plastic. "Several months at minimum. The desert preserves some things while destroying others. We'll know more once we get this back to the lab." The unwrapping process reveals the remains of a woman, badly decomposed but still bearing evidence of violent death. A gunshot wound to the head becomes immediately apparent. More disturbing is the discovery that the victim's fingertips have been deliberately severed. "Someone really didn't want her identified," coroner observes grimly. Detective photographs every detail, knowing that this case will likely depend on the smallest pieces of evidence. The methodical removal of identifying features suggests they're dealing with someone who planned carefully and understood investigative procedures. The victim appears to be Hispanic. Based on remaining hair samples and bone structure, her approximate age falls between 30 and 40 years. Beyond these basic details, the desert has claimed most other obvious identifiers. As the remains are carefully transported to the coroner's office, detective begins the process of checking missing persons reports. The isolation of the dump site and the careful concealment suggest the victim may not be local. Someone traveled a significant distance to reach this desolate location. The Garfield County Sheriff's Office buzzes with activity as news of the discovery spreads. Sheriff calls an emergency meeting with senior staff, understanding that this case will likely test the limits of their small department's resources. "We're dealing with a homicide that was clearly premeditated," detective reports to the assembled team. The victim was transported to an isolated location and disposed of in a way designed to prevent identification. This isn't a crime of passion. The lack of immediate identification creates the first major hurdle. Detective begins the painstaking process of cross-referencing missing persons reports from surrounding states. The Hispanic ethnicity of the victim suggests she may have been reported missing in areas with larger Latino populations. Media attention arrives swiftly. Local news stations pick up the story, dubbing the unknown victim the Maidenwater victim, after the nearby spring. The name sticks, becoming part of the case file and community consciousness. Public reaction ranges from fear to morbid curiosity. The idea that someone could be murdered and dumped so close to their community disturbs many residents. Some begin locking doors that had never known keys, while others speculate about the victim's identity and the circumstances of her death. Detective establishes a tip line, hoping that publicity might generate leads. The calls pour in immediately, mostly from well-meaning citizens, offering theories rather than facts. Sifting through the information proves time-consuming but necessary. One caller reports seeing a suspicious vehicle near the dump site several months earlier. Another claims to have witnessed a man acting strangely at a local gas station. Most tips lead nowhere, but detective follows each one, methodically, understanding that cases often break on seemingly insignificant details. The forensic examination reveals additional disturbing details. The victim was bound with rope before being wrapped in plastic. Duct tape secured the outer layers, creating an almost waterproof seal. Someone took considerable time and care in the disposal process. DNA samples are collected and submitted to the state laboratory, though the backlog means results won't be available for several weeks. Detective also requests comparison with the FBI's missing persons database, hoping for a match that might provide the victim's identity. As days pass without significant progress, the case begins to feel overwhelming. The methodical nature of the crime suggests an organized killer, possibly someone with law enforcement or military training. The complete removal of fingerprints indicates knowledge of investigative techniques. 6 months after the discovery, detective continues working the case, despite mounting pressure to focus on more recent crimes. The Maidenwater victim file has grown thick, with reports, photographs, and dead-end leads, but the victim's identity remains unknown. The DNA results provide a profile but no matches in existing databases. Detective submits the information to CODIS, the national DNA database, hoping for a future hit that might crack the case. For now, the scientific evidence offers little help in moving the investigation forward. In October 1998, a new missing person report crosses detective's desk. Edward Geddes, a soft-spoken man in his 40s, reports that his wife Lena has disappeared. According to Geddes, his wife traveled to Mexico to visit family but never arrived at her destination. The report initially seems routine. Lena Reyes Geddes is described as a 37-year-old Hispanic woman, approximately 5 feet tall with dark hair. Her physical description falls within the parameters established for the Maidenwater victim, but thousands of women could match those characteristics. Geddes appears genuinely distraught during his interview with detective. He explains that Lena often visited family in Mexico, usually staying for several weeks. This trip was different because she planned to explore possibly moving there permanently due to marital problems they were experiencing. She took some clothes and her identification, Geddes tells detective. Said she needed time to think about our marriage. I thought she'd call when she got there, but no one's heard from her. Detective notes the details carefully, but doesn't immediately connect this missing person case to the Maidenwater victim. The timeline doesn't match perfectly, and Geddes's explanation seems plausible. Many people cross the border to visit family in Mexico without maintaining regular contact. The investigation into Lena's disappearance proceeds slowly. Detective contacts Mexican authorities, but receives little cooperation due to jurisdictional complications. The Mexican police report no records of Lina's arrival, but documentation isn't always reliable in remote areas. Geddes provides photographs of his wife and details about her habits and preferences. He seems cooperative and genuinely concerned about her welfare. Detective files the information but focuses primarily on more promising leads in other active cases. As winter approaches, both the Maiden Water victim case and Lina's disappearance grow cold. Detective maintains the files but admits privately that without new evidence or witnesses, solving either case seems unlikely. The desert has kept its secrets well. The years pass with frustrating regularity. Detective retires in 2000, passing the Maiden Water victim case to younger investigators, who review it periodically, but make no significant progress. The file moves between desks as personnel changes, each new detective promising to bring fresh eyes to the evidence. In February 2001, news arrives that shocks everyone who worked on Lina Reyes Geddes' missing person case. Edward Geddes is found dead in Nevada, an apparent suicide. His body is discovered in a remote motel room, a gun beside him, and a note expressing his inability to continue living with his guilt. The suicide note is vague but troubling. Geddes writes about things he can't undo and mistakes that haunt him every day. He mentions Lina repeatedly, asking for her forgiveness, but never explicitly confessing to any crime. The note raises more questions than it answers. Nevada authorities contact Garfield County about Geddes' death, knowing about his wife's missing person report. The timing strikes everyone as suspicious. Why would a grieving husband take his own life 3 years after his wife's disappearance? What guilt was he carrying? Detective who handled Lina's case reviews the file with new scrutiny. The dates of her disappearance and the discovery of the Maiden Water victim are troublingly close. Both women were Hispanic, both approximately the same age and height. The coincidence seems too significant to ignore. A formal comparison is requested between Lina's missing person description and the Maiden Water victim's remains. The physical characteristics match within acceptable parameters, but without dental records or DNA from family members, definitive identification remains impossible. Geddes' death creates a media sensation in the small community. Newspaper articles speculate about his possible involvement in his wife's disappearance. Some residents remember him as a quiet, troubled man who kept to himself after reporting Lina missing. Others defend him as a victim of tragedy rather than its perpetrator. The suicide effectively ends any possibility of questioning Geddes about his wife's fate. If he was responsible for her disappearance, his death represents the ultimate escape from justice. The case files are updated to reflect his death, but the investigation remains officially open. Family members of both Lina and the Maiden Water victim continue to seek answers. Lina's sister Lucero, now in her 20s, begins her own investigation into her sister's disappearance. She contacts detective regularly, asking about new developments and pushing for continued investigation. The community gradually moves on from the tragedy, but the questions linger. 2 unsolved cases, a murdered woman and a missing wife, hang over Garfield County like a persistent shadow. Justice feels increasingly elusive as time continues its relentless march forward. Years blend into decades as the Maiden Water victim case settles into the cold case files. New investigators occasionally review the evidence, but advances in forensic science are slow to reach the small Utah county. The case becomes a cautionary tale told at training seminars, how even the most careful investigation can fail without the right technology or breakthrough. In 2018, 20 years after the discovery, an amateur sleuth studying cold cases makes an observation that changes everything. While reviewing missing person photographs online, she notices a distinctive mole on Lina Reyes Geddes' ear in the police photo taken when she was reported missing. The amateur sleuth contacts the current detective assigned to cold cases, explaining her discovery. The mole is clearly visible in Lina's missing person photo, a small but distinctive mark that would survive decomposition better than other identifying features. Detective requests the Maiden Water victim evidence be re-examined for this specific detail. Coroner's photographs from the original examination are enhanced and scrutinized for any trace of the identifying mark. The decomposition and 20 years of storage make the examination challenging but not impossible. Advanced imaging techniques reveal what appears to be the same distinctive mole in the same location on the Maiden Water victim's preserved ear. The discovery sends excitement through the cold case unit. After 2 decades, they may finally have the key to the victim's identity. Lucero Reyes receives the call she has waited for since childhood. Detective explains the potential breakthrough and requests DNA samples from family members to confirm the identification. The conversation is emotional as Lucero realizes her sister may finally be coming home. "I knew she was dead," Lucero tells detective through tears. But knowing and proving are different things. If this is really Lena, then at least we can lay her to rest properly. The DNA comparison process takes several weeks, during which Lucero and her family oscillate between hope and fear. 20 years of uncertainty have prepared them for disappointment, but the possibility of finally knowing the truth overwhelms their caution. Media attention resurfaces as news of the potential identification spreads. The Maidenwater victim case returns to public consciousness, bringing with it renewed speculation about Edward Geddes and his possible involvement in his wife's death. Community members who remember the original cases express amazement at the breakthrough. The distinctive mole, such a small detail, becomes the key that unlocks 2 decades of mystery. It highlights how modern technology and persistent investigation can breathe new life into the coldest cases. The formal identification process begins as laboratory technicians prepare to compare DNA samples from Lena's family with genetic material preserved from the Maidenwater victim. The scientific process is methodical and precise, but for Lucero and her family, each day feels like an eternity. The DNA results arrive on a cold December morning in 2018. Detective opens the envelope with hands that tremble slightly. 2 decades of uncertainty, about to be resolved with scientific certainty. The laboratory report is clear and unambiguous. The Maidenwater victim is Lena Reyes Geddes. The confirmation brings both relief and renewed pain to Lena's family. Lucero, now 31 years old, has spent more than half her life not knowing what happened to her beloved sister. The positive identification provides the answer she desperately needed while confirming her worst fears. At least now we know, she tells Detective during an emotional phone call. Lena can finally come home. Detective immediately reopens the case as a homicide investigation. With the victim's identity confirmed, the focus shifts to determining who killed Lena and disposed of her body in the Utah desert. Edward Geddes' suicide in 2001 makes him the primary suspect, but proving his involvement requires more than circumstantial evidence. The original physical evidence is re-examined using modern forensic techniques unavailable 20 years earlier. The rope used to bind Lena's body, the plastic wrapping, and the duct tape are subjected to advanced DNA analysis. The hope is that the killer left trace evidence that escaped detection in 1998. News of the identification spreads rapidly through the community and beyond. Local media outlets report the breakthrough, emphasizing both the tragedy of Lena's death and the persistence that led to her identification. The story resonates with audiences fascinated by cold case investigations. Lucero begins making arrangements to bring her sister's remains home for proper burial. The process involves coordinating with multiple agencies and making decisions about funeral arrangements that should have been made 20 years earlier. Every detail carries emotional weight, accumulated over 2 decades of uncertainty. The investigation team reviews Edward Geddes' background with renewed focus. His suicide note is reanalyzed for hidden meanings or coded confessions. Friends and associates from 20 years ago are contacted for interviews, though many have moved away or died in the intervening years. Detective also examines the geographical connection between Edward's life and the dump site. The isolated location on Highway 276 required specific knowledge of the area's layout and traffic patterns. Someone familiar with the region would know that bodies deposited there might remain undiscovered for months or years. Public reaction to the identification is mixed. Some community members express relief that the Maidenwater victim finally has a name and family. Others feel disturbed by the confirmation that a local resident was likely murdered by her husband. The case forces people to confront the reality that domestic violence can escalate to ultimate brutality. The investigation continues with renewed energy, but Detective knows that time has been both enemy and ally. While evidence has degraded over 20 years, new technologies offer possibilities that didn't exist in 1998. The challenge is determining whether enough evidence remains to definitively solve the case. The breakthrough comes in March 2019, when forensic specialists employ the MVAC system to collect DNA from the rope that bound Lena's body. This advanced wet vacuum technique can recover genetic material from surfaces previously considered impossible to test. The process represents the cutting edge of cold case investigation. The MVAC analysis reveals not 1 but 2 male DNA profiles on the rope. The first belongs to an expert in knot tying who was consulted during the original investigation. His DNA contaminated the evidence during examination. The second profile, however, proves far more significant. When compared against DNA databases, the second profile matches Edward Geddes. Samples from his suicide scene in Nevada, preserved in evidence files, provide the comparison material needed for confirmation. The match is definitive and damning. Detective stares at the laboratory report with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. After 21 years, the case finally has its smoking gun. Edward Geddes didn't just kill his wife, he left his genetic, signature on the rope used to bind her body before disposal. The DNA evidence transforms the investigation from speculation to certainty. Edward Geddes murdered Lena, transported her body to Utah, and disposed of it in a manner designed to prevent identification. His careful planning and knowledge of forensic procedures suggest premeditation rather than a crime of passion. District Attorney reviews the evidence and confirms that the case would have been prosecutable had Edward lived. The DNA match, combined with the circumstances of his suicide and his proximity to both the victim and the dump site, provides overwhelming proof of guilt. Press releases announce the breakthrough to media outlets and the public. The case that began with an unidentified body wrapped in plastic has finally been solved through persistence and advancing technology. Edward Geddes is posthumously identified as Lena's killer. Lucero receives the news with complex emotions. Relief at finally knowing the truth mixes with anger at Edward's escape from justice through suicide. The man who tearfully reported her sister missing had actually orchestrated her death and hidden the truth for years. He looked us in the eye and lied, Lucero tells reporters. He let us hope she might still be alive while knowing exactly what he had done to her. That's a special kind of evil. The community grapples with the revelation that Edward Geddes, remembered by some as a grieving widower, was actually a calculated killer. His suicide, once viewed as a tragedy compounding the loss of his wife, now appears as the final act of a man unwilling to face justice for his crimes. The case generates renewed interest in cold case investigations and the importance of preserving evidence for future analysis. The MVAC technique used to recover Edward's DNA becomes a talking point in forensic science circles, highlighting how technology continues to evolve in service of justice. The revelation of Edward Geddes as Lena's killer sends shockwaves through the community in April 2019. Press conferences draw large crowds as detective and district attorney explain how modern forensic science finally solved the 21-year-old murder. The case becomes a symbol of justice delayed but not denied. Local newspapers publish detailed accounts of the investigation, from the original discovery of the Maidenwater victim through the DNA breakthrough that identified both victim and killer. Readers express amazement at the persistence required to solve such an old case and gratitude that Lena's family finally has answers. Lucero becomes an advocate for other families dealing with missing persons cases. She speaks at conferences and support groups, sharing her experience of waiting decades for answers while maintaining hope. Her story resonates with audiences who understand the particular agony of not knowing what happened to a loved one. The not knowing was almost worse than knowing she was dead, Lucero explains to a gathering of victim advocates. At least now we can grieve properly and remember Lena as she lived, not as a mystery that haunted our family. The investigation into Edward's motives reveals a complex picture of a troubled marriage and a man struggling with his desires for another life. Interviews with people who knew the couple describe tension and arguments in the months before Lena's disappearance. Some remember Edward mentioning wanting to start over somewhere new. Detective uncovers evidence of Edward's affair with another woman during the period leading up to Lena's murder. The relationship provides a possible motive for his decision to kill rather than divorce his wife. Friends describe him as someone who wanted to escape his current life but felt trapped by circumstances. The methodical nature of Lena's murder and disposal suggests Edward planned the crime carefully over weeks or months. The remote dump site, the careful binding and wrapping of the body, and the removal of identifying features all point to extensive premeditation. This wasn't a moment of rage but a calculated execution. Psychological profiles developed by experts paint Edward as a man who felt cornered by his circumstances and chose murder as his solution. His subsequent suicide indicates an inability to live with his actions, but his years of deception show a capacity for sustained dishonesty that disturbs everyone who knew him. The case prompts discussions about domestic violence and the warning signs that might predict escalation to murder. Experts point out that Edward's desire to start a new life, combined with his unwillingness to face the financial and emotional costs of divorce, created a deadly combination of motivation and opportunity. Community members struggle to reconcile their memories of Edward as a grieving husband with the reality of him as a cold-blooded killer. The deception lasted for years, with Edward maintaining his facade even as he reported his wife missing and cooperated with the investigation into her disappearance. Investigation into Edward's background in May 2019 reveals additional disturbing details about his relationship with Lena and his behavior following her disappearance. Former neighbors recall arguments echoing from the Geddes home in the weeks before Lena vanished, though none suspected the violence would escalate to murder. Detective interviews Edward's former lover, now living in a different state. She describes Edward as charming but secretive, someone who spoke vaguely about starting a new life together without explaining how he planned to end his marriage. The woman expresses shock at learning about Lena's murder and her unwitting role as possible motivation. "He said he was going to leave his wife," she tells detective. "He made it sound like it would be simple, like she would just disappear from his life. I never imagined he meant it literally." The geographical analysis of the dump site reveals Edwards' familiarity with remote Utah locations. Investigators discover he had visited the area on hunting trips, providing knowledge of the isolated terrain that made it suitable for disposing of a body. The location choice wasn't random but reflected careful planning. Forensic accountants review Edwards' financial records from the period around Lena's murder. The analysis reveals unusual cash withdrawals and expenses that coincide with the timeline of her disappearance. The spending patterns suggest purchases of materials used in the crime and disposal. The rope used to bind Lena's body is traced to a hardware store in Edwards' hometown. While the specific purchase cannot be proven after 20 years, the rope type and construction match products available at that location during the relevant time period. The circumstantial evidence continues to accumulate. Lucero travels to Utah to meet with detective and see the location where her sister's body was discovered. The journey is emotionally difficult, but provides closure she has sought for 2 decades. Standing beside Maidenwater Spring, she finally understands the desolate place where Lena's story ended. "She was so far from home," Lucero says quietly, looking across the desert landscape. "He brought her to this empty place and left her like she was nothing, but she wasn't nothing. She was everything to us." The visit helps Lucero plan for bringing Lena's remains home for proper burial. The logistics are complicated by jurisdictional issues and the need to coordinate between multiple agencies, but progress moves steadily toward the goal of reuniting the family. Media coverage expands beyond local outlets as the case attracts national attention. True crime podcasts and television programs feature the story, emphasizing both the investigative techniques that solved it and the human impact on Lena's family. The case becomes a teaching tool for law enforcement and a source of hope for other families with missing loved ones. The investigation officially concludes with Edwards' posthumous identification as Lena's killer. While justice in the traditional sense cannot be served due to his suicide, the truth has finally emerged after more than 2 decades of uncertainty. The case files are updated and archived as officially solved. Lucero makes her final trip to Utah in June 2019 to escort her sister's remains home for burial. The moment represents the culmination of a 21-year journey from hope through despair to resolution. Local law enforcement officers gather to show respect as Lena begins her final journey home. The funeral service takes place in the church where Lena and Lucero attended Mass as children. The building is filled with family members who never stopped believing this day would come, friends who remembered Lena's vibrant spirit, and community members touched by the family's perseverance through decades of uncertainty. Lena is finally at peace, the priest says during his eulogy, but more importantly, her family can now be at peace as well. The questions that haunted them have been answered, and the truth has set them free to remember Lena with joy rather than anguish. The grave marker bears Lena's name, birth date, and the year she actually died, rather than when her remains were identified. The inscription reads simply, "Beloved daughter. Never forgotten, finally home." The words capture both the tragedy of her loss and the triumph of her return. Detective attends the service, feeling a profound sense of completion after working the case for several years. The investigation consumed countless hours and resources, but seeing Lena's family finally able to grieve properly makes every effort worthwhile. Justice may have been delayed. The burial is private, attended only by family members and closest friends. Lucero places a photograph of herself and Lena as children on the casket, a reminder of their bond, that death and time could not break. The sisters are together again, at least in memory and spirit. Media coverage of the funeral is respectful, but extensive. The story has captivated audiences who followed the investigation from the DNA breakthrough through its resolution. Lena's case becomes a symbol of hope for other families dealing with unsolved disappearances. In the months following the burial, Lucero establishes a foundation to support families of missing persons. The organization provides resources for long-term searches and advocates for improved forensic techniques in cold case investigations. Lena's legacy becomes one of helping others find the answers her family sought for so long. The Garfield County Sheriff's Office receives commendations for their persistence in solving the case. The investigation is highlighted as an example of how advances in forensic science can breathe new life into even the coldest cases. The MVAC technique used to recover Edwards' DNA becomes more widely adopted by law enforcement agencies. District Attorney speaks at conferences about the case, emphasizing the importance of preserving evidence even when initial investigations fail to produce results. The careful storage of physical evidence from 1998 made the 2019 breakthrough possible, highlighting the need for proper protocols in cold case management. As 2019 transitions into 2020, the resolution of Lena's case continues to reverberate through the true crime community and law enforcement circles. The story demonstrates how persistence, advancing technology, and careful attention to detail can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles in pursuit of justice. The case study is incorporated into training programs for detectives and forensic specialists. The progression from unidentified remains to solved murder illustrates the importance of thorough evidence collection, proper storage techniques, and willingness to re-examine old cases with new tools and perspectives. Amateur sleuths credit the case with inspiring their own involvement in cold case investigations. The distinctive mole that led to Lena's identification proves that fresh eyes and careful observation can sometimes spot details that professionals miss. Online communities dedicated to solving cold cases reference Lena's story as an example of civilian contributions to justice. Lucero continues her advocacy work, speaking at victim rights conferences and supporting other families dealing with missing persons cases. Her foundation grows slowly but steadily, providing resources and emotional support to those enduring the particular agony of not knowing what happened to a loved one. The pain never goes away, Lucero tells a gathering of victim families, but having answers helps you carry it differently. You can honor your loved one's memory instead of being haunted by mysteries. The desert location where Lena's body was discovered becomes an unofficial memorial site. Visitors leave flowers and stones, creating a small shrine beside Maidenwater Spring. The isolated spot that once represented concealment and abandonment now serves as a place of remembrance and reflection. Advances in forensic science continue to benefit from lessons learned in Lena's case. The MVAC technique proved successful in other cold case investigations, recovering DNA evidence from items previously considered useless. The technology spreads to more laboratories and police departments across the country. District Attorney uses the case to advocate for increased funding for cold case units. The resolution of Lena's murder after 21 years demonstrates that older cases can be solved with proper resources and commitment. The investment in cold case investigation pays dividends in justice for victims and closure for families. Public interest in the case remains high, as documentaries and podcast episodes continue to feature the story. The investigation's progression, from hopeless cold case to solved murder, captures audiences' imagination and reinforces faith in the justice system's ability to eventually uncover truth. The community where Edward and Lena lived continues processing the revelation that a respected resident was actually a killer. Some neighbors express guilt at not recognizing warning signs, while others question their ability to judge character. The case serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind ordinary facades. The year 2020 brings continued reflection on the case's broader implications for criminal justice and victim advocacy. Law enforcement agencies across the country study the investigation as a model for how persistence in advancing technology can overcome the challenges of cold case work. Forensic laboratories report increased interest in the MVAC system, following its success in Lena's case. The technique's ability to recover DNA from items previously considered worthless has applications far beyond this single investigation. Other cold cases begin benefiting from the same technology that finally identified Edward as Lena's killer. Lucero's advocacy work expands as she partners with other organizations supporting families of missing persons. The foundation she established in Lena's name provides grants for DNA testing, private investigators, and other resources that families often cannot afford during long-term searches for missing loved ones. Every family deserves the truth, Lucero says during a television interview. Lena's case shows that answers can come even after decades, but families shouldn't have to wait alone. We need to support each other and never give up hope. The case becomes required reading in criminology programs at several universities. Students analyze the investigation's progression from initial discovery through final resolution, learning about the importance of evidence preservation, technological advancement, and investigative persistence. Lena's story educates the next generation of law enforcement professionals. Detective, now nearing retirement, reflects on the case as the defining investigation of the career. The 2-decade journey from unidentified remains to solved murder represents both the frustrations and rewards of police work. The resolution validates years of effort by multiple investigators who refuse to let the case fade into obscurity. Mental health professionals studying the case focus on Edward's psychological profile and the factors that led him to murder. His apparent inability to cope with marital problems and desire for a new life provide insights into domestic violence escalation. The research contributes to better understanding of warning signs and intervention strategies. The courthouse, where District Attorney presented the evidence, houses a permanent display about the case. The exhibit educates visitors about cold case investigation techniques and the importance of never giving up on justice for victims. Lena's photograph occupies a central place in the display, ensuring she is remembered as a person rather than just a case number. International law enforcement agencies study the investigation's techniques and outcomes. The successful resolution after 21 years provides hope for similar cases worldwide. The methods used to identify Lena and connect Edward to her murder offer a template for other jurisdictions dealing with cold cases. Community healing continues as residents process the revelation that Edward Geddes was a killer hiding among them for years. Support groups help neighbors cope with feelings of betrayal and confusion. The case forces difficult conversations about domestic violence recognition and community responsibility for protecting vulnerable members. As 2020 progresses, the global pandemic creates new challenges for Lucero's advocacy work, but also demonstrates the importance of family connections and support systems. Her foundation adapts to virtual meetings and online resources, continuing to serve families dealing with missing persons cases despite the restrictions on travel and gatherings. The case documentation is digitized and made available to researchers studying cold case investigation techniques. The comprehensive files provide a complete picture of how the investigation evolved over more than 2 decades, offering valuable insights for law enforcement professionals and academic researchers. Victim rights organizations highlight Lena's case as an example of why families should never lose hope for answers. The 21-year journey from discovery to resolution proves that justice can prevail, even when circumstances seem impossible. The story becomes a beacon for other families enduring the agony of uncertainty about missing loved ones. Scientific journals publish articles about the forensic techniques used to solve the case. The MVAC DNA recovery method receives particular attention as researchers document its effectiveness in extracting genetic material from evidence previously considered worthless. The peer-reviewed studies help establish protocols for using the technology in other investigations. Edward's suicide note is reanalyzed by forensic psychologists seeking to understand the mindset of someone who committed murder and lived with the secret for years. The vague language and expressions of guilt take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of his confirmed involvement in Lena's death. The amateur sleuth who identified the distinctive mole receives recognition from law enforcement organizations for her contribution to solving the case. Her careful observation and willingness to contact authorities demonstrate how civilian involvement can provide crucial breakthroughs in cold case investigations. Detective prepares comprehensive case files for transfer to the archives, ensuring that future researchers and law enforcement professionals can study the investigation's methods and outcomes. The documentation includes not only evidence and reports, but also reflections on lessons learned during the 2-decade pursuit of justice. The community holds a memorial service in early 2021 to honor Lena's memory and recognize the resolution of her case. Local officials, law enforcement personnel, and residents gather to remember not just a victim of violence, but a vibrant woman whose life had meaning beyond the circumstances of her death. Lena was more than a cold case that got solved, Lucero tells the assembled crowd. She was a daughter who loved her family, a sister who made me laugh, a friend who cared about others. That's how we should remember her. The memorial includes the unveiling of a small monument near the courthouse, dedicated to victims of unsolved crimes and their families who never stopped seeking answers. Lena's name appears prominently on the dedication plaque, ensuring her story will inspire future generations to pursue justice with persistence and hope. Local law enforcement establishes an annual award in Lena's name, recognizing outstanding work in cold case investigations. The first recipient is Detective, whose years of dedication to the case exemplify the commitment required to solve the most challenging crimes. The award ceremony becomes an emotional celebration of both justice achieved and work continuing. District Attorney announces the creation of a specialized cold case unit, funded partly by grants obtained using Lena's case as a successful example of what such investigations can achieve. The unit will focus exclusively on unsolved cases, using modern technology and dedicated personnel to pursue justice for victims and closure for families. As 2021 continues, Lucero publishes a book about her family's journey, from loss through uncertainty to resolution. The memoir combines personal reflection with advocacy for missing persons' families, using Lena's story to illustrate both the challenges and possibilities inherent in long-term searches for truth. The book becomes a bestseller in the true crime genre, with readers drawn to the authentic voice of someone who lived through decades of not knowing what happened to a beloved family member. Lucero donates all proceeds to her foundation, ensuring that Lena's story continues helping other families seek answers. Speaking engagements take Lucero across the country as she shares her experience with victim advocacy groups, law enforcement conferences, and community organizations. Her message remains consistent: never give up hope, support each other, and trust that truth has a way of emerging even from the deepest darkness. The case influences legislation in several states regarding evidence preservation requirements for cold cases. Lawmakers recognize that advancing technology can make previously useless evidence crucial to solving old crimes. Lena's case provides compelling testimony for the importance of proper storage and continued analysis of physical evidence. Television documentaries about the case air on multiple networks, each focusing on different aspects of the investigation and its resolution. The programs reach millions of viewers, spreading awareness about cold case investigation techniques and the importance of supporting families dealing with missing persons cases. The final chapter in Lena's story isn't about her death but about the life her memory continues to inspire. Lucero's foundation grows into a national organization, providing resources and support to families of missing persons. The work ensures that Lena's legacy extends far beyond the circumstances of her murder. Detective, now retired, volunteers with the foundation, sharing investigative expertise with families who need guidance navigating law enforcement systems. The collaboration between professional and personal perspectives creates a unique resource for people dealing with long-term missing persons cases. The MVAC technology credited with solving Lena's case is adopted by law enforcement agencies worldwide. Hundreds of cold cases benefit from the DNA recovery technique, validating the investment in advanced forensic science and proving that solutions to old crimes continue emerging as technology evolves. Edward's story serves as a case study in domestic violence escalation and the warning signs that might predict such extreme outcomes. Mental health professionals and victim advocates use his profile to educate others about recognizing dangerous situations before they reach fatal conclusions. The desert location where Lena's body was found becomes an official memorial site, with a small parking area and informational plaque describing her story. Visitors come to pay respects and reflect on the persistence required to achieve justice. The isolated spot that once represented abandonment now symbolizes hope and remembrance. Years pass, but Lena's impact continues rippling through the criminal justice system and victim advocacy communities. Her case is referenced in Supreme Court arguments about evidence preservation requirements, demonstrating how individual stories can influence broader legal principles and protections for victims. Lucero, now recognized as a national expert on missing persons advocacy, testifies before Congress about the need for improved resources and coordination in cold case investigations. Her testimony references Lena's 21-year journey from discovery to identification as evidence that persistence and proper support can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Law enforcement training programs continue using Lena's case as a teaching tool, emphasizing the importance of thorough evidence collection, proper storage techniques, and willingness to re-examine old cases with new technology. Generations of detectives learn from the investigation's successes and challenges. The courthouse display about Lena's case expands to include information about other cold cases solved using similar techniques. The exhibit becomes a destination for researchers, students, and families dealing with missing persons cases, providing both education and inspiration for continued pursuit of justice. District Attorney, reflecting on a career defined partly by Lena's case, speaks frequently about the responsibility law enforcement bears to victims and their families. The case demonstrates that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied, but only if investigators and prosecutors maintain their commitment to truth, regardless of time's passage. The community that was once divided by suspicion and fear finds healing through understanding Lena's complete story. Memorial services on the anniversary of her identification become annual traditions, bringing together residents to remember her life and celebrate the resolution that seemed impossible for so many years. Local schools incorporate Lena's story into curricula about citizenship, justice, and community responsibility. Students learn about the importance of reporting suspicious activity, supporting victims' families, and maintaining faith in the justice system, even when answers seem elusive. Her story educates young people about the values that strengthen communities. The amateur sleuth who identified the crucial mole starts a blog documenting her continued work on cold cases. She credits Lena's case with inspiring her involvement and demonstrating how ordinary citizens can contribute to extraordinary breakthroughs in pursuit of justice. Her work inspires others to examine old cases with fresh eyes. Forensic science advances continue benefiting from lessons learned during Lena's investigation. New techniques for DNA recovery, evidence analysis, and case management trace their development to insights gained from her case. The investment in solving one woman's murder pays dividends in justice for countless other victims. Edward's former associates continue grappling with the revelation of his true nature. Some seek therapy to process their inability to recognize warning signs, while others become advocates for domestic violence awareness. His deception serves as a powerful reminder that evil can hide behind familiar faces and ordinary circumstances. The case files, now permanently archived, serve as a comprehensive record of how persistence, technology, and human dedication can overcome time and circumstance in pursuit of truth. Researchers studying the investigation gain insights into both the technical and emotional aspects of cold case work. Lena's family establishes a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in forensic science, criminal justice, or victim advocacy. The program ensures that her story continues inspiring others to choose professions dedicated to seeking truth and supporting those who suffer from crime's aftermath. The memorial garden created near the courthouse features plants native to both Utah, where Lena's body was found, and her childhood home, symbolizing the journey that brought her story full circle. Visitors often comment on the peaceful atmosphere and the sense of resolution the space provides. Detectives' final report on the case becomes required reading in law enforcement academies across the country. The document provides a detailed account of investigative techniques, technological advances, and the emotional toll that cold cases exact on everyone involved. Future officers learn from both the successes and challenges documented in its pages. District Attorney's closing summary emphasizes that while Edward Geddes escaped earthly justice through suicide, the truth's emergence provides a different kind of justice, one that honors Lena's memory, supports her family's healing, and demonstrates society's commitment to never forgetting victims of violence. The story concludes not with Edward's death or Lena's burial, but with the ongoing impact of truth's emergence after decades of darkness. Her case becomes a beacon for other families enduring similar uncertainty, proof that answers can emerge even from the most hopeless circumstances. Lucero's advocacy work expands internationally as she partners with organizations supporting families of missing persons worldwide. Her message transcends cultural and national boundaries. Never give up hope, support each other, and trust that truth possesses its own power to emerge from even the deepest concealment. The techniques pioneered in Lena's investigation save countless other families from enduring similar decades of uncertainty. Cold cases across the globe benefit from lessons learned during her investigation, validating the investment in forensic science and demonstrating that justice, though sometimes delayed, remains achievable. The desert wind still blows across Highway 276, but now it carries memory rather than secrets. The place where Lena's body was hidden has been transformed into a site of remembrance and reflection. Visitors come to pay respects and draw inspiration from a story that proves truth's ultimate triumph over concealment. 23 years after a couple noticed something unusual beside a lonely Utah highway, Lena Reyes Geddes rests in peace, her story complete. Her legacy lives on in the countless families who find hope in her journey from mystery to resolution, and in the commitment to justice her case inspired. The investigation that began with unidentified remains in the desert ends with a name, a story, and a family's healing. Lena is finally home, and her truth echoes across time, inspiring others to never stop seeking answers, never stop fighting for justice, and never stop believing that light can emerge from even the darkest mysteries. In the end, Edward Geddes took Lena's life but could not take her legacy. Her story continues inspiring others to choose justice over silence, truth over deception, and hope over despair. The community that once lived in shadow now walks in the light of resolution, forever changed by one woman's journey home.